I never thought I'd be in a battle with my own HOA over something as simple as my farm animals, but that's exactly what happened. Imagine waking up one day to find that not only were my beloved animals taken away, but they were also euthanized without my consent, just like that. Why? Because the HOA decided they didn't want any farm animals in the neighborhood. No warning, no notice, just a cold, harsh decision. But here's the twist. They had no idea who I was. I'm the agriculture director, with a deep understanding of farming laws and animal care. And yet, they made the fatal mistake of assuming they could just push me around. What they didn't know is that I spent years advocating for agriculture rights and protecting farmers. The shock and anger I felt when I found out what happened to my animals was overwhelming. The more I dug into this, the more I realized how many regulations they were ignoring. But the fight's not over. I'm ready to take this to the next level, and you won't believe what happens next. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and trust me, the fallout is just beginning. To understand how this all started, you need to know a little bit about my farm. It's not just a hobby, it's been my passion for years. Raising animals is something I grew up doing, and it's not just about the animals, but the lifestyle. The fresh eggs, the goats that help clear brush, the chickens that provide companionship, it's all part of what makes my land feel like home. So when the HOA moved in, everything was fine at first. I assumed they'd be fine with my setup, since I've always kept everything in good shape, followed the rules, and never caused any problems. But that all changed when new HOA officers came into power. At first, they started sending letters about little things, like making sure my fence was painted the right color or my grass was cut to the right height. Annoying, but nothing major. Then, out of nowhere, they started making demands about my animals. No more goats, no more chickens, and definitely no more pigs. They said they were disrupting the community and claimed they weren't appropriate for residential areas. It didn't make any sense, and it felt personal. The more I tried to reason with them, the more aggressive they became. They sent letters, they threatened fines, and finally, without any legal warning, they showed up with animal control. That's when the unthinkable happened. I wasn't just fighting for my animals, I was fighting for my rights, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The day animal control showed up was the day everything changed. I remember seeing the truck pull into my driveway, the flashing lights reflecting off the morning sun like some kind of warning. I knew something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. When the officers stepped out, their cold expressions sent a chill down my spine. They didn't speak much at first, just started walking toward the barn like they had all the authority in the world. It felt like a scene out of a nightmare. I tried to approach them, explain that I had followed all the necessary guidelines and that the animals were part of my livelihood. But the officers were unmoved, almost mechanical in their approach. One of them, a tall guy with a harsh tone, said it was time to take the animals away because they were causing a nuisance. I asked to see their paperwork, any legal documentation that gave them the right to do this, but they just ignored me. It was like they had already made their decision, and nothing I said could change it. That's when I found out about the new HOA officers. One of them, a woman named Sarah, had been the one pushing hardest to get rid of the farm animals. Apparently, she had been in charge of the HOA for less than a year, but already she was making waves, enforcing rules that seemed to come out of nowhere. I did some digging into her background and discovered that she had no agricultural experience. She didn't know a thing about farming or animals, let alone the laws that protected them. I wasn't just fighting for my animals anymore. I was up against someone who had an agenda, and it didn't involve common sense or fairness. As I continued to dig deeper, I started learning more about how the HOA was using its power. There were complaints from neighbors, mostly about things like noise and smell. But what struck me as odd was how many of these complaints seemed exaggerated. There was even one from a family down the street who claimed they couldn't walk their dog because of scary animals. Yet, these neighbors never spoke to me directly. Instead, they went straight to the HOA, creating this weird atmosphere where my farm became the villain. The real kicker came when I found out that Sarah had been quietly discussing revamping the entire neighborhood's aesthetic, including limiting any visible signs of farming. My heart sank. It was more than just a few farm animals. This was about changing the very character of the community. She wanted everything to look perfect, but at what cost? Was this about cleaning up the neighborhood, or was it about control? And why wasn't anyone else questioning her decisions? By the time I showed up at the next HOA meeting, I was furious. I knew I had to stand up for my rights, and for every farmer or landowner who could potentially fall victim to this kind of overreach. But when I walked into that room, things took an unexpected turn. I wasn't prepared for what happened next, and trust me, neither were they. The HOA meeting was unlike anything I have ever imagined. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone's eyes turned to me, and I knew they were just waiting for me to say something wrong, something they could twist. But I wasn't going to back down. I had prepared for this moment, and I had evidence, proof that what they were doing wasn't just unfair, but illegal. I stood up in front of the room, and for a second, I could almost hear the sound of my heartbeat over the murmurs of the crowd. My voice shook slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. I told them everything. About the animals, the threats, the laws they were violating, and most importantly, about Sarah's hidden agenda. I mentioned the complaints I had uncovered and how most of them had come from a few select people with personal grudges. The more I spoke, the more I could see the cracks in their defense, but I wasn't done yet. As I was about to drop the biggest bombshell, the one thing I knew would completely expose their overreach, a man in the back of the room suddenly stood up. His face was red, and he looked like he was about to explode. It was one of the neighbors who had complained about the animals. But instead of backing down or apologizing, he did the opposite. He accused me of violating the HOA's rules from the very start. He claimed that I had misled everyone, that my animals had always been a problem, and that I was the one causing all the trouble. I wasn't prepared for that. It hit like a punch to the gut, especially since he was lying through his teeth. It took everything in me to stay composed. As the meeting spiraled into chaos, as the neighbor continued to rant, I felt my blood pressure rising. He was twisting the truth, and everyone in that room seemed to be buying into it. But just when I thought I might lose control, something unexpected happened. A voice from the back of the room cut through the noise. A woman I didn't recognize stood up, her face tense with frustration. "This is wrong," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've been living here for years, and this whole thing feels off." Everyone fell silent, and I could feel the shift in the room. The woman walked forward, her eyes locking with Sarah's. "You've been pushing this perfect neighborhood agenda for months, haven't you?" She continued, her gaze now firmly on Sarah. The room was stunned. No one had seen this coming. Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't say a word. Instead, the woman, who turned out to be a longtime neighbor and farmer herself, continued to speak out. She had been quietly observing how Sarah had been systematically targeting people with farm animals, pushing them out under the guise of community aesthetics. And to my shock, she revealed that she had been secretly documenting Sarah's actions, including her shady dealings with several HOA members. The room was silent again, but the tension was unbearable. It was clear that Sarah had been using her position to further her own personal agenda, and this woman was the proof I needed. The stakes had just gotten much higher. This wasn't just about my animals anymore. This was about corruption, power, and how far someone would go to make sure their vision of a perfect neighborhood was the only one that mattered. But just as I thought we were on the brink of exposing everything, Sarah's demeanor changed. She leaned forward, and with a cold smile, she said something that made my stomach drop. "You think you've got me cornered, but you have no idea what's coming next. You're not going to win this fight." The room went dead quiet again. I knew we weren't even close to being done. The true battle was only just beginning. Sarah's words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. I could feel the tension building again, like we were on the edge of something huge. The room was silent, all eyes flicking between Sarah and me. But then, before I could even respond, the woman who had spoken out earlier stepped forward, her eyes narrowed, and she dropped a bombshell that made everyone gasp.